Alright everyone, we start off today talking about the rise of the New Right. That was sort of a dirty word that was paired falsely, but it was, with alt-right actually years ago. But in the end, the New Right has managed to shift the Overton window. I think what happened over the last half-decade generally is you had a really far right that rose up, partially due to meme culture and partially due to people's dissatisfaction with globalistic neoliberalism. And what you had was, then you also had MAGA, and the New Right, we'll term it, rising up as well. What happened is that both of these forces combined to drag society to the right, generally speaking, on a plethora of issues, certainly on guns, certainly on economic issues. Anti-globalism would come to mind as the main one, taxes in general as a secondary, and certain culture war sort of aspects too. So, for years, the left kept moving further and further and further to the left. So first it's like, hey, we want basic dignity for gay couples. We want them to be able to get a state property contract, which is what state marriage is. Now we find ourselves in a situation where you have communism being taught in public schools, along with sexually explicit material being peddled to grade schoolers and things, nasty things of that nature. And there was a reaction to this. It almost mimics the abortion debate. For a very long time, there was a general consensus. There were states where it was more or less limited, but nobody really rocked the boat. Just in the wake of Roe v. Wade, the states, generally speaking, just created certain restrictions. It tended to be like a 12-week, a 15-week thing, with exceptions for health, of course, and that was really what happened. But the left went further left, with Ralph Northam, with their third trimester abortion legality bill, and certain other states followed along, and the reaction was Dobbs, the 8-week abortion limit that was at question there, thus tanking Roe v. Wade and causing some dilemmas for both parties at the moment. The New Right, or what I would say is the MAGA right, really it's the populist right, really is, though, not really so much a major change within GOP politicking. It's really the restoration of what the GOP was before the neoliberal consensus era. So it's more like with Dwight Eisenhower or something like that. It's a party of the people. It involves the lower class, the middle class, the working class. It involves wanting actually limited government, which is something the conservatives, so-called, really never delivered on. Bush expanded government. Ronald Reagan's second term did the same thing. Herbert Walker certainly did. He was a desperate warmonger. World policing is definitely part of this because, of course, that requires more military spending. I would note that the Republicans grew some balls with the reconciliation bill. Not one of them voted for the doubling of the IRS. Now, years ago, I would have expected some of them to cuck on it and simply say, we humbly submit that we would like a couple of minor amendments to the reconciliation bill. Okay, would say the Democrats. Well, that fits right in line with our goals. What do you want? Oh, we want more military spending or something like that. And then it'd be left up to the Senate parliamentarian, who, by the way, has done more than any other human being at the moment to stymie some of the worst excesses of the Biden administration. I'm just saying the Senate parliamentarian's been doing a good enough job to get roundly panned by the communistic leftoids right now. I would like to submit something, though. The New Right has been victorious over the neocons within the GOP. The Boeberts and the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Myra Floreses and so forth, the Trumps of the party, the Rand Pauls, people who stand outside of what was the establishment, have effectively subsumed an entire political party. That's the good news. The bad news is that some individuals that are adjacent to this are being distracted by moralist issues. This is a problem the GOP had back in the 80s and 90s. By the way, certain Democrats did too. It was Tipper Gore leading the charge for the parental warning system on music. Oh my God, little Jimmy's listening to heavy metal again. Soon he'll be worshiping the devil. We need to do something about this. You see a doppelganger argument with video games and certainly with internet free speech at the moment. There was a bit that I talked about literally the other day on this basic topic. They are attempting to come for your internet free speech again. We no longer have corporations to stand against it like we did in the golden age of them having big-ass signs on their site saying, sign the petition to stop SOPA or ACTA or PIPA or any of the other acronyms by which they sought to destroy the internet as we know it. Here's what the new right must do, though. Number one, avoid the billionaire money. That was a big corrupting factor in the Republican Party. It has now been shifted entirely to the Democrats. They have become, and it's very visible, the party of big money. I've even seen fluff pieces by the multi-billion-dollar legacy media saying, well, what do the billionaires think about the current trajectory of politics? Question they never asked 5 or 6 years ago, I will know. This is partially due to Trump deliberately alienating these people in order to do the man of the people thing, which is partially political strategy, although I think there is a kernel of truth to it. That is one thing that definitely needs to be done, though, which is that the new right can't do what the old right did and start gobbling up that big money. Now, it is inevitable that every system that comes into power, if the power is significant enough, will be corrupted by it in time. I'm looking at a timeline of 15, 20 years before what is currently the new right degrades into a corporatist or oligarchic outfit and becomes authoritarian. You will see the rise of a new liberalism at some point in that same period of time to counter it, which again, at first, much like with the anti-war movement of the 2000s, will be more libertarian-leaning, actually. Hey, let's stop bombing people. Hey, let's stop giving hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars to corporations. This is the trajectory arc of the yesteryear's liberals. They got corrupted very quickly. It didn't even take a decade. That was a rather short paradigm, by the way, for them in the wake of Clinton. What will happen is that is inevitable, but it needs to be held off as long as possible. Slow the degradation, get some reform going. Another big part of it is vigorous defense of free expression. You have a slurry of candidates right now who are censored or who have faced possible censorship by mega corporations, globalistic corporations, deplatforming of their fans by banks, silencing by the legacy media, etc., etc. If they abandon the principle of free expression in favor of cucking on the issue of hate speech or something akin to it, that would be a disaster. It would rip it apart in its infancy. It'd be like getting one of those third trimester Northam abortions, I suppose. About the same effect. They would be ripped out backwards and then tossed in the trash can. My hope is that the new right holds the line on these issues. But I would vigorously implore them not to simply hold the line. Go further than that. Don't just say, hey, we're not for any more gun control. That's what the neocons did. No, you should be pushing more court cases forward to try to expand the Second Amendment as much as possible. Don't just say, hey, we support free speech. We're unhappy about censorship. Actually do something about it. And don't just say, hey, the billionaire class, which now largely supports the Dems, is problematic. Do something about it. You're not going to get the Democrats on board to undo Citizens United, but you may not need them. You may be able to do that with your votes instead, thus permanently enshrining a more fair political system. This would be great. And operate from the ground up. That's the most important part. This is the one greatest success, I think, of the new right over many movements. Instead of doing the top-down thing, which MAGA got derailed by doing this for several years, this was probably Trump's biggest problem. And it wasn't his that he caused, but it became his biggest problem anyway because of the mentality of people that voted for him. And I warned about that, you'll remember that, but I was paid no heed. Instead of expecting the God Emperor to solve all your problems, you have to take some initiative. Work from the ground up. This is also the case with defeating big government. It requires that you institute jury nullification. It requires that you self-improve. It requires that you go out and knock on doors. Should you have to go through all of these things in order for society to be reasonably adept, to be reasonably fair, and to have a reasonable economic capability? No, you shouldn't have to go out of your way and put in any extra effort other than casting a piece of paper every other year. I would agree with that. But if you want true reform, you do have to go through the extra effort. For decades and decades, we've had a sort of slow rot, a decay of the right, of the left, of everything within American politics. It doesn't require an enormous amount of effort to change that. The new right, to its credit, has done a lot more footwork than most contemporary movements. Occupy devolved into people shooting up heroin in their tents and raping each other. The Tea Party devolved into moralism fairly quickly, although they held the line economically, and some of them still do, and again, that's to their credit. You have similar movements. throughout time and throughout living memory. We're talking about the last 20 years. We're not talking about something ancient, like from the 60s, like the hippies or something. Although they too got degraded and corrupted, and many of them went off to become McMansion classers. You'll notice the yuppie movement was comprised of a lot of people who decided to shave their hair sometime around 1976 and said, well, shit, I'm coming off one hell of a bender, but all of a sudden I'm making six figures, and I really just want the new Macintosh and some neon lights and a black table that reflects so that I can see my aging visage. The rise of the new right is a good thing, but there's still plenty of work to be done. If you rest on your laurels and say, well, MAGA has subsumed most of the Republican Party, the neocons will creep back in, and they still have a lot of money and influence, and they'll corrupt the MAGA people that have gotten in there. So the fight continues, and again, those are some basic premises that they should operate on. You've got to be free speech absolutists, gun absolutists. Don't get distracted by the moralist agenda sort of thing and end up in a bogged down trench warfare style fight over meaningless issues when there are so many meaningful things to talk about. That's about all. Peace out.